bunkers at Berth 5. The water was like glass as the Danube riverboat cruised along at a leisurely pace, leaving ripples radiating out to the shore behind. The lush green Wachau Valley with its colorful green and yellow countryside, vineyards, almond and apricot trees was all framed by a beautiful clear blue sky. I was spending the day with my new staff to try and build some company unity and give them a break from the heavy workload they had been enduring. Then in the middle of lunch I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket and excused myself from the table. I stood at the stern to enjoy the scenery and looked at the phone. I could see by the caller ID that it was my boss. Mr. Grosser said he had a surprise for me, Lucy and Rob. 3 luxury cars were in transit to us. I was to call him on Monday morning when they arrived at the office. This sounded too good to be true, so I didn't get my hopes up, but Rob couldn't wait to get his present and take it for a spin on the Autobahn. From my office window I could see the shiny cars arrive on a flatbed transporter truck. There was a cherry red Ferrari, bright yellow Lamborghini and opal blue Porsche. I called Grosser as ordered. He said the Ferrari was for me, the Lamborghini was for Rob and the Porsche for Lucy, but there was a catch. I knew it. The catch was that these cars had been in a private collection in a below-ground garage during the recent New York floods. Terrific, not? So these great-looking cars were useless. Our job was to take them to 3 different highly reputable car restorers and find the one with the best value for money. All expense would be covered by the company. I made my way downstairs and found Rob with slumped shoulders. He had found his car was all moldy inside. I told him not to worry, our job was to get them fixed, then we could have them. Lucy hadn't bothered to come down. I had told her about the call on my way out. I knew what she would be doing, looking for a repairer as soon as possible, and before I had finished talking to Rob, a tow truck was on the scene wanting the Porsche. Rob didn't wait either, he was off to the elevators madly tapping the up button to get on with the job. I could see him now in my mind's eye, flat out down the Autobahn at top speed with the wind in his hair and stereo blasting Born to be Wild. As I arrived back in my office I could see a second tow truck approaching the front of the building. I asked the name of the repairers they had chosen to make sure we didn't double up and surf the net for one of my own. As the tow truck pulled away with the last of the 3 cars I found myself daydreaming of driving down cobbled streets through Europe in my amazing albeit strange gift. Over the next couple of weeks we would often talk about our cars, looking forward to the day they would come back. We had various other projects to work on, but Grosser had asked me to spend some time in our shipping section. That wasn't hard because our shipping section consisted of one man, a retired ex-Navy man Jimmy. I immediately promoted him and asked if he could recommend some staff to boost the section. He was happy to do so and brought along 5 of his old retired friends who were bored at home and keen to break into the corporate world. I had to report to Grosser, so I told him about our applicants. I didn't get the response I expected. He said they would be perfect if they were ex-Navy and to boost the section with as many ex-salvage people I could find. So this was obviously going to be a sea salvage job involving cars. Grosser knew I would put 2 and 2 together, but would not elaborate until our cars returned. In the meantime I worked closely with Jimmy and his team touring the wharf, looking at other ocean salvage operations and putting together our own team. While we were all busy setting this up, one by one our cars came back. Lucy was not altogether happy with her Porsche repair, and Rob said his car still had a fishy smell, but my Ferrari was just like new. Grosser was happy we had found a good repairer and was securing a major deal with them for 1,500 luxury cars. Again I knew what was coming. Apparently a car carrier had a collision with a container vessel and was listing badly, and the first well-prepared salvage boat to reach it would win the contract. Well prepared. All we had was 6 retired sea dogs, 12 oil rig workers, 8 construction workers, 6 welders and 3 electricians. We didn't even have a ship. Grosser said not to worry, the ship was due in Vienna port at Berth 5 tomorrow for bunkers. It was fully equipped, we just needed to sail full speed ahead to the coordinates. Well, that sounded easy, not? I could see this was going to be a disaster if we didn't get the team in order immediately. The personnel were ready. Lucy had interviewed and recruited very carefully, hiring people who could leave at a moment's notice. We assembled in the company gymnasium, which had 3 basketball courts. Considering the staff numbers, we were able to make 3 equal teams for me, Lucy and Rob. This way we could work 3 8-hour shifts each day without getting tired. The ship was on time, but our faces sank when we saw the rust bucket being piloted into berth. The old Navy men checked her out thoroughly during fueling. They said she was an old ship, but they thought they could take her out and get her back again. That was reassuring. One catch: we needed a couple of good engine men and some engine parts in case of breakdown. This was no trouble for the now christened Captain Jimmy, who went to an old greasy warehouse on the wharf and returned with a couple of old salts, followed by 2 forklifts carrying 2 big crates each. With no time to waste, we shipped off as soon as the ship was fueled. The ship was called the Glomar Explorer, state-of-the-art 50 or more years ago, I'm sure, but a rust bucket now. Fortunately, the control room and below deck had been well maintained. There were only enough bunks for a third of the crew, so we allocated the shifts of midnight to 8 a.m., 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., 4 p.m. to midnight between me, Lucy and Rob respectively. It turns out this was used as a U.S. Navy vessel at some stage, so there were some officers' quarters, so the 3 of us shared one of those, being allocated the necessary 8 hours to sleep. The rest of the crew, apart from Captain Jimmy, were to share their bunk in the same way. There was a good galley which was well stocked, thanks to grocer, but no chef. We soon found crew with the necessary skills. There was also a deck which had a few basketball courts marked out, which the crew made good use of in their spare time, even making some of their own gym equipment. We had at least a 3-day voyage ahead of us, so thanks to the good weather, we settled into a routine of working, relaxing and sleeping. Some crew swapped teams to shifts they preferred. Lucy ended up with most of the ladies, although some preferred to work in the men's teams. We had to prepare the ship to take on board 1,500 waterlogged cars, so we started to cut away any unwanted steelwork on the top deck, of which there was plenty. We had to lighten the load and clear as much flat space as we could. Ramps were also cut into all decks, which created a series of multi-level car parks, because we thought once lifted on board with the cranes we could at least roll the cars to the bottom. Chains were welded into place to hold each car for the trip back. Some of the crew succumbed to seasickness to the point where they needed to leave. We managed to get a message through to Grocer, who was sending a helicopter, but he said it would be tight because some bad weather was on its way. There were some other supplies we badly needed, so we gave him a wish list including a few more crew to replenish levers, which he said he would take care of. By the time the supply helicopter arrived, the crew had cleared and painted a very professional helipad. The wind and waves were picking up, and the flight crew said they were lucky to make it. They also said we needed to batten down the hatches and prepare for a storm, to which a couple more crew departed, knowing they needed their land legs back. We welcomed the new crew with a party, which in hindsight wasn't a good idea in high seas. The food found its way onto the floor in more ways than one. We had a rough night, but by daybreak, much to everyone's delight, the storm was gone, providing us with a calm sea and bright sunny day. We knew we were close now and hoped the storm hadn't sunk the car carrier called the Chinese-registered Happy Flower. Or worse still, that another company might have beaten us to the prize. About mid-morning, one of the crew came to see me while I was in the control room with Jimmy. He said I needed to come and look at what the Sparkies had found. Lucy was still awake, so I sent for her to meet us in the galley. We were taken from there through a series of doors and tunnels to a military control room with radars, sonars and all sorts of equipment I didn't know what was for. The Sparky there said he knew how to operate some of the equipment because he did his apprenticeship in the Navy, but it needed a power supply connected. In his opinion, the room had been forgotten about when the ship was decommissioned by the US Navy. One of our curious welders had found the door welded shut and decided to grind it open. All power cables had been cut, so the room was isolated electrically. I couldn't see the harm, seeing as all the other work had been completed, so with consultation with Lucy we gave them permission to connect the power. 2 hours later they had most of the equipment online. The radar had picked up a flotilla of vessels 20 nautical miles north, and one appeared to be 3 miles below them. We prepared ourselves for the worst. It seemed as though all our cars had gone to the bottom of the ocean. Jimmy said we had the rigging to go 3 kilometers down, and a room of diving gear had been found along with suits and oxygen bottles. Rob, an avid amateur shipwreck diver, had ordered, which came in on the chopper, fortunately along with a professional diver that Grosser hired to bring the appropriate equipment. It didn't take us long to travel 20 nautical miles. We presumed this was our ship and so sailed straight toward the radar markers. One of the crew called for all senior officers to the control room, so we made our way up to see about 10 U.S. Navy ships surrounding the listing Happy Flower. What was going on here? We were hailed by a destroyer to stop all engines and prepare to be boarded. Jimmy called all stop, but the engineers couldn't pull her up quick enough for the Navy, and they fired a warning shot over the bow. We apologized profusely when the ship was then boarded by a menacing Navy SEAL team. The commander was not very personable and asked why we were transmitting a U.S. Navy signature. Apparently we had strolled right into a naval operation when all other ships had been turned away. Fortunate for us, because we were now the first to get salvage rights over the car carrier, but that's if we could somehow get through this situation. The commander ordered everyone out of the military control room and posted guards with big guns at the door. The rest of his team were positioned at various points leading to the top deck, and he took a pair back with him, saying we would be given further instructions soon. I had given one of the deckhands the duty of scraping some weathered paint off one of the outer bulkhead walls. He came to my office and said, "So you need to come and look at this." I went with him to find he had uncovered the ship's previous name, the USS Hamman. I instructed him to quickly paint over it. In the midst of the bustling naval activity, another one of our crew came to me and said she had found a schematic of the ship, revealing a hidden room with degaussing equipment. I went with her and found that the few crew members the Navy had allowed to stay on board had used a blowtorch to gain access to this room. Their reasoning for doing so without orders was that a grinder would have been too loud and could have alerted the Navy. At least I got to go inside first. On a dusty old desk in the middle of the room, I found a dusty old file containing a military report from the war days. It read, "In 1943, a group of brilliant researchers, including Albert Einstein and Franklin Reno, embarked on a scientific journey determined to unlock the secrets of the unified field theory, a concept that had baffled scientists for generations. Their experiments led them to a groundbreaking discovery, the ability to manipulate light and render objects invisible. Excited by the potential military applications, the U.S. Navy sponsored an experiment to test this new technology on the USS Eldridge. The researchers discovered a way to manipulate light, bending it around objects and rendering them completely invisible. This remarkable breakthrough caught the attention of the U.S. Navy, who saw the immense military potential of this technology. Eager to test its capabilities on a grand scale, the Navy sponsored an experiment using the USS Eldridge and its crew as the subject. Alongside the team of researchers, engineers and scientists had worked tirelessly to harness the power of these enormous electrical generators in order to create a field of energy capable of bending light. A sense of anticipation arose as the experiment began. A low hum filled the air, growing louder and louder until it reached a deafening pitch. The observers watched in awe as the USS Eldridge started to shimmer and distort, then fade from view, disappearing before their very eyes, becoming nothing more than a ghostly outline against the sky. The researchers and Navy officials watched in awe as the ship became completely invisible. Witnesses reported a greenish fog appearing in its place. As quickly as it disappeared, the ship reappeared before them, seemingly unharmed, as if nothing had ever happened. The researchers cheered in triumph, celebrating their success at achieving the impossible. The experiment had been an outstanding success. The Navy was thrilled at the thought of using this technology in warfare. The date of the experiment was October 28, 1943. USS Eldridge not only became invisible, but disappeared from the area and teleported to Norfolk, Virginia, over 200 miles, 320 kilometers away. It is claimed that Eldridge sat for some time in view of men aboard the ship SS Andrew Furuseth, whereupon Eldridge vanished and then reappeared in Philadelphia, at the site it had originally occupied. Degaussing experiments, which have the effect of making a ship undetectable or invisible to magnetic mines, was the experiment's cover story. Levitation, teleportation, and effects on human crew might be attributed to experiments with the generating plant of the destroyer USS Timmerman, wherein a higher frequency generator produced corona discharges. Apparently, there was a significant timeline inconsistency. The USS Eldridge was commissioned on August 27, 1943, and it remained in port in New York City until September of that same year. The October experiment took place while the ship was on its first shakedown cruise in the Bahamas. The explanation is that the USS Hamman was actually used rather than the USS Eldridge, as the USS Hamman arrived in the Philadelphia shipyard on October 20, 1943. Intrigued by the possibilities, I gathered a small team and embarked on a secret mission to activate the equipment. After setting up the machinery, I nervously pulled down on the power switch, not knowing what to expect. To our amazement, everything around us went into a state of suspended animation. Ships, water, people, and even birds froze in motion, creating a surreal scene. Quickly seizing the opportunity, we sprang into action, boarding the car carrier and moving valuable vehicles to a safer location. I stopped and looked around for a moment, realizing we had gone back in time before the two ships collided. We moved a few more classic cars before returning to our ship. First going past the frozen crew of the car carrier, I couldn't help but feel a sense of awe at the power in this equipment. Working swiftly, I asked one of my crew to add a remote to the main switch, then weld the door shut to keep our newfound ability a secret. With a sense of triumph, we remotely turned off the switch, watching as life resumed its normal pace around us. It wasn't long before the Navy inflatable craft approached with the same 3 men plus 2 female officers and a man in a suit. The suit was introduced to us as Mr. Carter, who was much nicer than the commander. The female officers were technicians who accompanied the commander to the naval control room, while Mr. Carter accompanied me, Lucy, and Rob, who had joined us by now, to the bridge. We were quickly briefed on the situation. Our ship had once been used to raise a submarine from the ocean floor back in 1974, and from what he could see was still equipped to do so. We were sworn to secrecy and told that an EPIRB had been set off near a U.S. Navy nuclear submarine and the car carrier. The submarine could no longer operate, and surfaced. The car carrier automatically switched over to older fully manual engines and subsequently ran straight over the sub. 7 of the sub crew were killed instantly, but all compartments forward and aft of the control room below the conning tower were sealed. 52 men were still inside and still alive for now, but oxygen was fast running out. Mr. Carter officially asked us if we could help, which we agreed straight away, but knew they would the ship with or without permission. At least with permission we might get some help with our salvage, but our mind was on the sub crew. Imagining them down there waiting for rescue was sickening. A lot of our crew were moved to an aircraft carrier, and by all reports were looked after very well. The rest of us helped the many hands that were ferried aboard from numerous Navy vessels in any way we could. They worked tirelessly for 3 hours and were ready for action. The huge rope chains descended into the water off the large reels, which were spinning fast. A specialized vessel near us deployed a robot sub to attach the ropes, and they started the ascent. The ship was suddenly rocked by something that felt like an earthquake, and we heard the Americans saying the sub had broken in half. Flotsam eventually rose to the surface, including life jackets, but no bodies. Apparently when the ocean silt settled, they could see via the remote cameras that the sub had broken at the flooded section, and it appeared we had 2 self-contained sides. I would hate to be the men inside. Hopefully they weren't badly injured. Then started the slow winding up of the reels, carefully so our ship wouldn't become uneven and capsize. It took most of the night. Then in the early morning, divers were sent down. 2 other ships came, 1 on each side of ours, and took the weight of 1/2 of the sub each. We all watched in awe as the sub halves were righted and gently winched on board the vessels. Then the moment of truth. We could see one of the inside hatches being opened by the ship's crew, and sure enough out came some very weary seamen and women. On the other boat an upper hatch was opened and a few people emerged, but most had to be lifted out and stretchered away. When it was all said and done, I asked how many survivors, and they said they had only lost 4 more souls and 2 critically injured. The Navy were very appreciative of our help but said they would have to remove most of the specialized electronic equipment unless we would consider a special contract for sea rescue when called upon. We asked where we could sign. After signing, they were going to lock the room and keep it for U.S. Navy personnel only, but was there anything they could do to help us first? I told them there was this little matter of the car carrier and explained what we hoped to achieve. Most of the Navy vessels left the area, leaving the aircraft carrier and 2 destroyers. Our crew had fortunately built a good rapport with the Navy and so worked well together. The not-so-happy Flower had been forgotten and had drifted some distance away. The calls of the skeleton crew started to sound more and more desperate as we made our way closer. Before we could reach her, we saw 2 lifeboats launch, one from each side of the ship simultaneously. They dived under the surface and popped up again. She was now deserted and we could see huge bubbles coming from below. A destroyer steamed ahead and immediately discharged 2 large inflatable buoys and sent out divers to attach them. The 2 other destroyers picked up the lifeboats. "We haven't got long," Mr. Carter said, who was in constant contact with the Navy. She was breaking up and would soon be headed for the bottom. With no time to lose, all available divers were deployed to the sinking ship, like sharks to a whale carcass. The divers concentrated on the 3 or 4 flooded decks with one crane while we tried to work out how to save the dry cars with the second crane. We had plenty of car slings, so one by one we swung ours onto the aircraft carrier and the flooded ones onto our ship. The divers were busy attaching inflatable buoys to each flooded vehicle and pushing them off the ship through the breached hull, making sure they cleared without damage. As the weight started to decrease, the car carrier seemed to decide to right itself, which made the work a little easier and safer, but suddenly a huge crack was heard and steel rivets went shooting into one of the destroyers in the ocean. All hands abandoned the car carrier immediately. They were picked up by whatever ship was closest, but before we could rescue them all, another almighty crack was heard and the destroyer's window was blown out by one of the rivets and some divers were hit in the water. We pulled the last of the divers aboard and all moved away as quickly as possible. We were all at the railing when the stress on the ailing ship literally tore her apart, rupturing the fuel tanks. Fire, rivets, steel sheets, chains, pieces of life rafts, and cars went in all directions, making a large black mushroom cloud rise up into the sky. A rivet went flying past my ear and ricocheted off the bulkhead and out into the water. A smoking number plate vehicle tag fell on the deck in front of Rob and spun around like a coin. He picked it up. It read, "Elvis." After mopping up and taking stock, we had rescued 498 flooded cars and 574 dry ones, not a bad effort under the circumstances. I can tell you it is the most fun I've had, driving a Mustang flat out around an aircraft carrier. Everyone had a turn. It was a real party atmosphere. One of the Vipers was basically a write-off because it was the last one off as the ship broke up. Fortunately, the suspension was intact, so the Navy sailors somehow gained permission to launch it using the fighter plane launcher as long as the fluids were removed first. I've never seen a car accelerate so fast. It went a good distance from the ship and it got a big cheer as it skipped twice across the water before breaking up. We accompanied the Navy ships back to New York, which took a couple of days. We called ahead to Grosser, who arranged for the dry cars to be driven away and the wet cars to be loaded properly on a car carrier and returned to Vienna, where the repairer held the contract to repair and detail them. When we had freshened up at a hotel, we went to our head office. Grosser invited me into his office and said he had a surprise for me. I told him I didn't want any more surprises with a catch like the Ferrari. He said there was no catch with this one. The owner of a dry vintage Jaguar, Michael Bublé, had rung Grosser to find out who he could thank for rescuing his car. Grosser had done a deal with the insurance company who had returned the Jag. About an hour later, Luce's phone rang and she melted when she heard it was Michael. He wanted to invite us to his show in New York the following weekend, and he heard from Grosser that she could sing and that I could play the saxophone. He needed someone to sing Quando with him and someone to play the sax. Lucy jumped at it and I nervously accepted. We did some light work at the New York office for a couple of days while we slowly got our land legs back. Lucy took a few singing lessons and I practiced the music, and soon enough the concert was on. Ours was the third song and Michael introduced us. It went really well. I wasn't as nervous as I thought I would be because the bright lights stopped me from being able to see how many people were there. Luce's voice sounded beautiful and I hardly missed a note. Rob came backstage after the concert and joined us all for the after party. Michael said we were great and could join him anytime. We booked our 3 seats in business class for a flight back to Vienna. After catching up with old friends, we left New York and had a good debriefing on the plane. Now that we had an ocean salvage vessel, we were truly a global company. On our first day back in the office, I heard a loud vehicle pull into Rob's reserved space. There he was, music thumping in a shiny bright green Lotus. He enjoyed the job of picking up each car as it came of the refurbishing line. He was responsible for quality control. Lucy enjoyed the pleasure of finding wealthy buyers and personally delivering the cars. Talk about networking. Me, well, until all the cars were sold, I could drive a different luxury vehicle home every day. I couldn't complain about that.